If you don't genuinely care about the success of the individuals on your team, you should probably question your motivation. All of a sudden, I had people reporting to me that were twice my age. So a lot of times you feel bad when you've got somebody that's been working longer than you've been alive, and now you have to have a conversation with them about their performance.
Welcome to another episode of Going Beyond the Title, from individual contributor to leader, where we interview people in a leadership position on the topic of not only leadership, but transitioning from being a individual contributor to a leader and what that's like. I'm your host, Michael Scarponi, and today's guest is Danish Yazdani. Danish, welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yes. How did you get into this work?
Yeah, so way back coming out of high school, I elected to enroll in college with chemical engineering. My dad was an engineer and worked in manufacturing, like engineering and operating operations leadership. And going through those conversations and seeing that growing up, I chose to follow basically in the same footsteps. So went to college for chemical engineering, got a job in the paper industry, which is where my dad did most of his time,
Okay.
and that's where it started.
Oh, excellent. And then tell me your position now and the company you're working with, and a little bit of background on that, please.
Yeah, so just a brief history. I worked in the paper industry, like I said, for about 8 years. Left there as a engineering leader, and then I switched companies and industries altogether. And now I've spent the last almost 20 years in human and animal nutrition, like food, beverage, nutraceuticals. And that's what I've done. My most recent position, I was vice president of operations and engineering. Um, at the moment, I've actually left that job and I'm in the process of building my own business, trying to learn a little bit about that and figure out what all those challenges are going to be. But yeah, it's been a good journey.
So tell me a little bit, give your business a plug here. What kinds of things are you doing? And do you have a website?
Not yet. I'm developing that right now. So honestly, I'm in the difficult task of trying to name my business.
Okay.
And then obviously that'll lead to the website and the marketing materials and things like that. But basically what my intent is to help companies grow, whether that's growth through expansion, capacity expansion, mergers and acquisitions, or just trying to improve performance, turning around areas that aren't operating as effectively as they can be, building teams, just using any of the knowledge and the struggles that I've had along the way to help other people. That's really, in a short phrase, what I'm trying to do.
Excellent. And if people want to reach out to you, they can reach out on LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. And as things mature and I get a company name and marketing material, obviously I'll transition my LinkedIn profile to make all those things stand out.
Yep. So in your career, what's a win you are particularly proud of?
Yeah, so one of the most interesting opportunities that I've had and I'm proud of is I got the chance to build a site at a new location, basically from the ground up. So I was the only company representative on the ground in that new location. Had to design the plant, build the plant, work through the construction, hire the people, train the people, get all of the relationships established in the new area. Because again, it was not an area where we were already operating.
Okay.
That process took nominally a year, which was actually pretty quick, going from nothing to having an operating manufacturing location that was sending product to customers. So that's probably one of the highlights of my experience.
And how many people did you have to hire?
Yeah, so it wasn't a big plant. We had somewhere in the low 20s of individuals, a small leadership team for all the functions, quality, administrative, logistics, things like that. And then the rest of the team, roughly a dozen people, were in operations and maintenance.
So to actually build a building, actually construct a building and then build the infrastructure, pretty amazing to
Yeah,
do it in a year.
yeah, we started with basically it wasn't 100% greenfield, but probably 99%. We started with basically a shell of a metal building, and that was it. There was no maintenance shop, no quality lab, no locker rooms, no offices,
Oh,
nothing on the grounds was completed. Obviously the infrastructure like sewer and power that was there,
sure.
but nothing that really fed, if you will, the equipment and the operation that we needed to build.
Excellent. On the other side, what's a mistake or something that a growth opportunity, I like to call them, that you learned from?
Yes, like, might have to come back to that one because I'm in 20 years of manufacturing, there's, like, probably 1,000 mistakes.
Yeah.
So let me think about one we wanna highlight, we can come back to that.
Sure, we could definitely come back to that. So, on a leadership journey, what's a piece of advice you would give to people that are stepping into a leadership role?
Yeah, so I actually made some notes, just kinda trying to predict where your questions would come from, and I know you wanted to focus on sort of that first leadership opportunity where you go from an individual contributor, maybe somebody that's got a certain technical skill that they've shown to be effective, and then they jump into leading something.
Mhm.
So I think some of the really early on activities that would help somebody in that space, one would be become mentally prepared for
Okay.
what the paradigm shift is going to be. And
Okay.
and the second would be to find a mentor that you trust and admire and that's walked that path before. Reason being that you can't do the first part about understanding the paradigm shift if you don't know what to expect. So some of the obvious ones, but you might not know in your situation is you probably got the opportunity to be a leader because you stood out or you were the best at whatever that individual role was. Doesn't have
Mhm.
to be in manufacturing, could be in any industry.
Mhm.
So having that paradigm shift from, your success is going to be not governed any longer by your individual output, but by the success and the results of your team or your department. So that's probably the number one thing that you have to wrap your arms around and like what all does that mean and the skills that made me stand out as an individual contributor aren't necessarily the skills that are going to drive the team forward.
Is there anything else that they could do to become mentally prepared? I know that you said that results are based on the team, not on the individual, and kind of wrap your arms around that. What else could they do to
Yeah,
put
so
that in
one of my
place?
big suggestions, besides the finding a mentor, is you really need to have a plan or a vision. So you're
Mhm.
stepping into a department or a team for the first time. Chances are that you know a little bit about that team already. Not always the case, but often the case is you're staying with your same company and you're working with a department that you're familiar with. So as part of that, you should develop a vision of like,
Mhm.
hey, this is the current state today, and a year from now, I want our team to look like X. Obviously, most industries are going to have some set of standards on which success is measured. So maybe in the manufacturing industry, it's things like safety, quality, productivity, cost, and customer service. But whatever that sort of short list of things is for your particular situation, develop a vision as to where you want to go in those different areas.
Yeah, I love that. I refer to it as "I have a dream" speech, so that
Exactly.
everybody is on everybody's on board. What beliefs about leadership did you have to let go of?
I think one of the common fears is that you have to know everything or you feel like you have to know everything. And I think that's probably one of the more difficult ones to let go of is again, you've got people on your team that all have different experiences, capabilities, opinions, backgrounds, and you don't have to always be the smartest person in every room to be successful. And learning to ask questions, asking for feedback,
Mhm.
and learning that it's okay to ask for help.
Mhm.
All of those things are very important in being a leader.
Yeah, in my conversation with leaders, I noticed that, or emerging leaders, one of the things I noticed that they feel that they have got to solve the problem. They have all the answers and have got to solve the problem rather than pushing back on the team to begin problem solving. Have you seen that in the past? And
Oh,
uh,
for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I think you might coin that or see that as like the imposter syndrome, and that affects everybody, myself included. Is again, you were a individual contributor. Now that you're the leader of something, and you want to
yeah,
make everybody, feel like you deserved that role as being the leader. And it's you just have to go through it, and there's no easy way around it.
yes,
But again, I think the ways that you can stand out and make that a comfortable transition is, number one, how you treat the people on your team. This is probably a little bit of a bold statement, but I feel like if you don't genuinely care about the success of the individuals on your team, you should probably question your motivation. That doesn't mean you have to be nice to everybody or shy away from accountability or any of those stereotypes that might
mm,
come into play, but in a way to establish your space as a leader. There's ways to go about that without feeling like an imposter. But yes,
Right.
it's definitely natural to be in that spot.
One of the things that I did in teaching a class actually last week of 15 people, I explained what imposter syndrome is and asked how many people if they were felt that they were an imposter, and every hand went up. So to your point, that we all kind of embrace that at some point, and we got to work through it, right? It's really difficult.
Yeah,
And
and the thing about that too is it never goes away, right? Because your environment is constantly changing.
yeah,
Like that first leadership opportunity is going to lead to other things. You switch departments, switch roles, switch companies. Even if you stay in the same department, you get a new boss. It's always dynamic and changing. So a
yeah,
lot of times that imposter syndrome never goes away.
yeah, yeah, agreed. What new beliefs did you have to adopt when you stepped into that leadership role or leadership roles in the past?
Yeah, so I think, things that are new is back to the idea about the success of your team is you almost never worried about anybody but yourself because you're always asking yourself, what can I do better? And things like that. While that's still important when you're a leader is to always reflect on your decisions and the way that you're behaving, it's even more important to take the time to ask your team for feedback.
Mhm.
What's going well, what's not going well, what can I help you with? What are your individual team members' goals and objectives? What would they like to do in the future? What are they good at? How would they like to see their role change at the site or whatever the business is? So I think that's oftentimes difficult because at least in my world for the last 20 plus years is there's always more problems and things to get done than you have time and resources. So taking that time to detach from the day to day or whatever the current crisis is to have those conversations with people that oftentimes takes a very pointed and focused effort to set that time aside.
Oops. Go ahead.
I was going to say the same. I didn't mention this when we talked about finding a mentor. But a lot of times you have to force that as well because your boss is almost always going to be well intentioned or whoever that mentor is, but they're fighting the same battle you are and probably at a higher level. So for
Mhm.
them taking the time to mentor you or to sit down and kind of see how things are going might not happen as frequently as you want. And if that's the case, you have to kind of stand up for yourself and um, you know push people to take that time with you and get your questions answered.
Yeah, something you said brought up another question. Outside of metrics, how do you know that the team is performing as it should?
Yeah, so I think, obviously the metrics is a big piece of it. But there's other ways that you can engage your team to see if you're making progress. So
Yeah,
again, when I talked about creating that vision, obviously that's going to lead to changes that you want to be made. And again, my tip is those shouldn't necessarily be just your specific opinions. Like you might have your observations about what your department can do better, but how to get from current state to future state, that's a discussion with your team.
yeah,
So getting people together as a team or one on one and asking for feedback on how do we get from A to B and then turning that into some type of action plan. I think that's a good way then to reflect your progress is like, hey, in the area of safety, we decided we had three priorities that we wanted to address
yeah,
to improve and to hit our vision. So you let that go a month or a quarter or whatever you think the appropriate time is, and you go back and reflect and okay, we set this goal 2 months ago. How are we doing?
yeah,
So
yeah.
those are things that they may not immediately cause a shift in a metric, but if you believe that those are the right priorities and the right things to do, you want to take tabs on where you're at with those items.
What leadership skills did you feel least prepared for when you jumped into a leadership role?
I would say for me, how to have difficult conversations was something that was an early struggle, and a lot of that too is something that you're not prepared for. Is if you're really a good performer, and I like to think of myself as that, you get
Yes,
that first leadership position when you're pretty young. So I
yes,
was in my like early to mid 20s when I got my first leadership position, and all of a sudden I had people reporting to me that were twice my age in some cases. So a lot of times you sort of like feel bad when you've got somebody that's been working longer than you've been alive, and now you have to have a conversation with them about their performance. So things like that are, mentally difficult to get over with at first, but like anything else, with some guidance or mentorship on how to get through that and practice,
Mhm.
uh, that obviously can be managed very easily.
Do you have any recommendations for people, any advice for people about how to go about having difficult conversations? This comes up a lot with the people I work with. They just don't know, and I have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah. So again, sort of my mantra is that, you have to develop trust and respect in the organization. And that comes with genuinely showing care for the individuals. So I think that sets the foundation for everything else. Like,
Mhm.
if despite having a difficult conversation, if the person on the other side sort of feels that way about you and yet you're being fair, oftentimes that sets the stage for a good conversation. And if you challenge the person to reflect on whatever it is that you're talking about, that's maybe a negative situation,
Yeah,
chances are if they trust you, you feel like you're being fair, and they self-reflect, then they're probably gonna at least partially agree that, yeah, I probably could have done that better, or take that advice that you're giving in as positive a manner as possible.
yeah,
Obviously, you're going to run across all kinds of different people and attitudes and behaviors throughout the course of your career. So you just have to kind of figure it out as you go. You're going to
right.
have people that no matter what you say or what they did, they're not going to agree, and
Yeah,
that may turn into a different decision or situation down the road. You just have to kind of figure it out. And again, if you've got a good mentor that you trust, you can always go back to them with, the results. Hey, I had a conversation with this person, it didn't go well, here's what happened. Do you have any
yeah,
suggestions for how to deal with it the next time?
yeah. You mentioned something that I've heard a couple of times from folks, and that's when they jump into a leadership position, they oversee people that are significantly older than they are. One case in particular, a lady got into a supervisor's position. She was in her late 20s and was overseeing people in their 50s. How do you make that jump? I mean, it's pretty daunting. What did you do in order to work through that age gap and let people know that, hey, I'm the boss here?
Yeah, I guess I was blessed in one way that I didn't have a large number of difficult employees. Again, generally speaking, I think people pretty quickly figured out that, number one, technically I was pretty strong and I could figure out what was going on in the operation. Two, back to the idea about setting a foundation around, integrity, trust, and care for the people on your team. So if you set the stage in the right way, I think that makes things a lot easier going down the road. And then from that point, it really just ends up being a kind of a confidence issue. Is the more that you deal with that situation, the less intimidated you're going to be when you have older employees working for you.
Yeah.
And again, I think you can go a long way with any employee, regardless of their age or capability, just by being helpful, asking for feedback, trying to make their job or their life easier and meet the needs. A lot of those small things and the way that you deal with them go a very long way with your team.
Yep. Got it. Those skills that you mentioned, what helped you develop those? You mentioned mentoring. What else helped along the way to strengthen skills?
Yeah, early on, unfortunately, I think there's a part of everybody's life where you kind of learn from mistakes. And maybe you handle the situation not in the best way, and you were lucky enough to have somebody that came and told you about it.
Hmm.
And then you started to sort of get the big picture of how to deal with certain things. Now that I'm a good bit older and I've got the experience there, so a lot of these answers that I've been given have just come through years of experience. And of course, everybody's built a certain way, right? So a lot
Yes.
of the leadership characteristics that I have inherited come through the way that other people are treated and that baseline of integrity. But everybody, has to develop their own path. And, it's not good that everybody be the same, right? Because you want diversity in an organization and people that see things and do things in different ways. But
Absolutely.
everybody has to find their own path and what works for them and what their foundational traits and behaviors are going to be.
Excellent. Any other thoughts about this topic? Anything else that you want to share with folks that might be watching this feed?
Let's see. I think maybe the only thing we haven't talked about that was in my notes was kind of back to that imposter syndrome piece, but the initial bias that I coach people about that are in this position a lot is being biased to do a lot of that work yourself. And I think you
Mhm.
mentioned it, towards the beginning of the call, but that's a huge item because one, you want to prove that you're better than everybody. Two is, and I struggle with this nonstop, is I don't have a hard time delegating work to others, but oftentimes I feel bad and I want to be seen as working as hard as the people that I'm asking to do the work. And that's really, really challenging at times. So getting over that bias and not being afraid to ask people to help you, I think is a really huge piece on how you go about doing that.
Tell me the struggle there because I hear it a lot. People, leaders take on responsibilities that they should delegate out because they feel their staff is already overworked. How do you, I don't know if balance is the right word, but how do you process that?
Yeah, that's very difficult, and you really hit the nail on the head with sort of where I hesitate myself is like nobody on my team is short of work for sure.
Mhm.
And so to ask them to do one more thing when they're already working like 10, 12 hours a day, that's
Right,
very difficult.
right.
Um, I think one way, and this is a huge problem in organizations today, is really being mindful of priorities. So the first thing that I try to do is to have a clear set of priorities and what's the most important thing. And then, like we talked about before, is a lot of times you just have to have a conversation with your employees. It's like, hey, I really need you to do this. Like, how
Yeah.
do you feel about the time and the resources that you have to do it? Is there something that you're stressed about that I can take off your plate? Or maybe we just deprioritize that and we'll get that done later. You have to have those conversations to kind of keep sanity within your team.
Yeah, I think that having a priority list because not everything is important. I mention to people what's going to move the needle, what tasks
Exactly.
are going to move the needle. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's easy to write that down on paper and like, hey, you have to prioritize. But in practical application, my experience is that's one of the most difficult things in all of business. And everything's well intentioned. I think I had a LinkedIn post about this a couple of months back, but especially in a growing organization, and I've been part of several that have grown quite dramatically. And you hire leaders from bigger companies and all kinds of things, and everybody wants to improve and move the ball forward. And everybody's idea, priority, whatever you want to call it, every single one of them is well intentioned and adds value.
hmm
But the unfortunate thing, and it's the reality that you just have to deal with, is you can't do them all.
right.
And if you try to do them all, you end up not executing anything and not making any improvements. And it's really important that a leader can kind of see where that starts to rear its ugly head and stops and does something about it. And that's not easy to do when you've got 5 or 10 other leaders that want something to get done. And at some point, you have to stop something to get something more important done.
Yeah, as technology has changed, the matrixed organization where you have dotted lines reporting up to different people really has complicated things because now everything becomes a priority from your
Exactly.
perspective. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
you
it's
know, go
extremely
ahead.
difficult to get people not necessarily to agree on the priorities, but it just business life is so difficult today when there's so much pressure to perform and grow and execute. It's just like an unavoidable issue that everybody has to deal with.
Yeah. Any other pieces of advice you could give folks that are watching?
Yeah, I think the one other tip, and this is kind of back to that delegation of work and some of those things, is you try to build a team that can operate and be successful without you. And that's another difficult thing to deal with, but you see that mentioned a lot, and I really think that's true, is developing your team and to make it run on its own and without you there. That's
Yeah.
one of the better things that you can look to achieve.
Yeah, yeah. You talked about priorities and time, and one of the things that I've noticed with a lot of groups is that They feel that building the team is really important. Having one-on-one conversations is really important, but they don't follow through because they say they don't have the time to do it. And I mean, what kind of advice would you give somebody like that?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to priorities, and sometimes
Mhm.
you have to force certain things into the workday or work week. And I think team building is one of those things. If the team can't get along with each other and have some of those conversations without being stressed about getting the day-to-day stuff done, it's going to be a difficult place.
Yep.
And through my career, that's been some of the most rewarding conversations is like, hey, just take a break from whatever the daily execution plan is. And let's, even if it's a conference call for a couple hours a month or once a month, to talk about what's the vision of the department, what's where we at on the things that we talked about last month. What are you guys seeing in your daily life that is important to talk about? And that gets different as you go higher as well, right? As your first job is probably going to be local. At my level, you might be nationwide, or even in my case, I've had global teams. And so to
Mhm.
take the time to get everybody together to have those conversations gets more difficult. But at the end of the day, it's really not that hard. And the amount of benefit that you get out of it, and projecting that people talk to each other and develop a family atmosphere at work is important to a lot of people. So
Mhm.
again, just taking the time, whether it's once a month or once a quarter, to detach, take a step back from the chaos and have those conversations is super important.
Yeah, one of the most critical things that I think a leader can do, have those conversations. Look, Danish, I really want to thank you for taking the time today. People can reach out to you via LinkedIn, uh,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah, and
choose.
if you want to post the link to my profile when you get this published, you're more than welcome to do that.
I will do that. This is Mike Scarponi again, and thank you, Danish. And we look forward to seeing you again from going beyond the title from individual contributor leader. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mike, and thank you for honoring me by inviting me to this podcast.
You're so welcome.
All right, take care.